Out in the California desert, at a place called the Center of the World, in Part 1 we met the men who pioneered parachuting and helped create today's sport of skydiving. Men like Jay Stokes, who did 640 jumps in one day. Pat Moorhead, who did 80 jumps on his 80th birthday, and we also met his wife Alicia. Roy Fox helped design parachutes that are on other planets. Clifford Dobson, who holds 38 world records. Andy Keach, who started jumping before World War II. And Marty Jones, who has jumped some 14,000 times. And now it's time to meet the lady pioneers of the sky. We'll meet the free-falling trailblazers of the sky and learn why they thought it was best to live a life out of the box in a time when women who did this type of thing were often considered crazy.
I started jumping in 1959.
Skydiving is the only sport I can think of that you will absolutely die unless you take some action.
My first jump in Calistoga was in 1964.
These are the legends of the fall. This is Kim Emmons, and she's one of the female pioneers of parachuting, and she's done all kinds of great, wonderful things with skydiving. So tell us all about that, Kim.
I started jumping in 1959, and it was in the winter, and I made my first jump, and these were round parachutes that were Army surplus from World War II. And so I made my first jump, and we didn't have much durability on there because we hadn't started modifying them or doing anything, so I took down all the power lines in December in Chicago, and about 50 homes were, I'm sure, very angry with us. I said, let's make another jumper quick so we can leave here, nobody will know who did it. Well, we ended up getting kicked out of that area, naturally. And so anyway, I continued jumping, and I think in probably my first, I think it was 25 jumps, I started competing. They said, I was the only female around the Chicago area that was jumping. And there were a few in California and a few on the East Coast. And they said, we have to have an international women's team that, you know, competes with the men. And they were just starting to get into world championships. So we did eventually evolve into that. And in 1962, we had a U.S. women's team and a U.S. men's team, and we competed in the World Championships, and the women won the gold, and the men got the silver, because they were training us, I think. And it was called the 6th World Championships, and it was held in Orange, Massachusetts, which was the first commercial skydiving center in the United States, and it was started with Jacques Cousteau and Lou Sanborn. And we are now in Felicity at the Museum of Man, and it's Jacques Cousteau again, 95 years old, he's still hanging in there.
This is a 1965 TV guide, and that is the Ripcord TV show from back in the day.
This is Ann Gardner Curtis, and she's a pioneer of skydiving. Tell us a bit about your life and everything you've done, Ann.
Everything. Wow, how much time do we have? I'm going to be 80 in a month, so I got a lot to tell. My first jump in Calistoga was in 1964, and my last jump was at Lodi with Bill Dawes in 1994. First jump in Calistoga, California, and I was living in San Francisco at the time. And the fun thing was, the other skydivers, I was the only one that had a car. So we'd all meet at my apartment and head to Calistoga. It was a Rambler American station wagon, super, two-tone. I say that because I was only running on 5 cylinders, but we'd head to Calistoga, and the back end would be, you know, like this because of all the gear in the car. But we just love to go to Calistoga. I still love Calistoga and live nearby in Pope Valley, where the Pope Valley Parachute Ranch was, which we started. Kurt and Tim Salsal and I started that in 1972. And I've lived there ever since everyone else moved out, including my ex, Kurt. So my main thing was free fall. I did like the challenge of accuracy and all that. Style I wasn't into that much. So worked away from your first hookup up to, I think the largest one I was in was a 26. And on the first, my SCR number, overall co-ed is 107. And then the first 8-woman star, I was on that 104. And I am in the Hall of Fame, you know, from here, for that accomplishment. So I'm so proud to have my name on this granite wall. I just think that's the coolest thing. So, never to be forgotten. I mean, it's in granite.
You are now etched in stone.
Etched in stone, and better that kind of stone than one at the end of time, you know.
Absolutely.
Yes. So since then, of course, I've kept up with quite a few friends. I'll never forget skydiving. You know, it was an experience. I think I made my last jump in 2014, but I hadn't made one for 14 years.
Anne is memorialized here in stone as the first 8-woman star. There's her name right there. And that's the star they formed. So Anne, what do skydivers do when they quit skydiving?
Well, mentally, you never really quit, but I took on a project of protecting some hillside land from development, so that because grapes are pretty prolific in Napa County, and they want to put them everywhere. I didn't want to see that happen. Or big absentee corporations, you know, buying up land. So it took me a decade, but I did manage to turn it into a wildlife preserve. I just want to end this by saying life is good.
Tell me about that tag that you're holding up.
Oh, this tag, we, through the years, they've developed the international, it was first National Skydiving Museum, and now they've gone international. And they're building, actually, the museum, and it's going to be a lot of virtual reality that you can go in and jump a parachute sitting in the chair, you know, virtual reality. And they're going to have wind tunnels, and plus it'll be a museum as well. The people in Europe said, don't call it a museum because they're going to think they're going to go in and look at displays. So they said, what we found out is we'll call it the skydiving experience. And that will draw people in to the skydiving experience, because that's exactly what it's going to be.
This is Nancy Gutman Tyler, and she's going to tell us a bit about her skydiving experiences and how she got into this sport. And she's also on the wall, and you can see her name right there.
This is the emblem for the Women's Starcrest Recipient Award Program, and for a woman to be in an 8-woman star for the first time, she qualifies to receive a Women's Starcrest Recipient Award number. And this number system has been going on since 1969, July, which was when the first Women's Starcrest 8-woman star was ever formed. So the numbers have grown sequentially through the decades, and many American and foreign women skydivers have received a WSCR. I started skydiving in 1969 at the encouragement of my brother. He was in the Green Berets, and he had made some jumps. And when he left the Army, he came home and he said, you know, there's something you ought to try, to jump out of an airplane. And so I took him up on it, and we went out to Lake Elsinore to the drop zone, Skylark Aviation at the time, owned by Larry Perkins' family. And when we got out there, my brother got a military discount. So his first jump cost $25. and mine cost 30. So that gives you a perspective on the cost of a first jump today, because whenever you're seeing this, it's going to be a whole lot more than $30. I didn't do too well on that first jump, and I remember my jump master at the time, Barry Lassinger, he was actually ready to kick me off the strut when it was time for me to go. It was a poised exit, static line, and all you had to do was basically let go and make him spread eagle into an arch. And I was hanging on, and he says, "Go," and I looked at him and said, "What?" And he says, "Go," and I go, "What?" Like I can't hear him or something. But he knew, of course, that I was afraid. So anyhow, I got through that, and when we landed, my brother had jumped behind me. When we landed, he said, "Nancy, you got to do that again, because that was not very good." So I went back 3 or 4 weeks later and made my second jump. When it was time for me to make my third jump, almost 2 years later, I owned my own gear, because I didn't want to skydive in all that military stuff. But the thing was that my gear was also military, and it cost me $35 for my reserve, which was a belly-mounted old military reserve system, and $25 for my harness, webbing, and main canopy. So altogether for $60, I had my own gear, and I made my own jumpsuit following a pattern of Sears catalog, men's work pant things, with an apron and all that. So I modeled my first jumpsuit after that, and I was fortunate enough to have been getting into the sport at a time when it was just really beginning to open up. And that, I always am so grateful that it happened to me at that point in my life, and that it made a difference in my life, because it gave me a different feeling about my own capabilities. I could actually leave an aircraft in flight. I could fling myself out to the earth. The thought of it, of course, is scary. It would be to anybody. But to overcome that is the magic of a first skydive. Because once you've done that, that sets a whole new bar for you and what you're capable of doing in your own mind. And that's the secret of skydiving. You never know it all. I think that is part of the wonderfulness about being able to skydive, that you have a sense of your own value, worth, self-discipline, self-control. You get all of that when you make a jump out of an airplane for the first time, because you are totally focused on something that is entirely new and strange to not just your head but your body, because you're in like suspended animation. You're in that elevator drop, and it's called sensory overload, and you just your body, your brain is so overwhelmed by this incredibly crazy input with no gravity and nothing to push on to move your body, to move your limbs. There's no opposing force, and that experience is pretty overwhelming. But once you settle into, like the jump, for example, under canopy, and you're floating around and looking at the earth from this whole different perspective, and you have such a feeling of exhilaration that you just, it's indescribable, and it's like a sense of personal accomplishment, because you were scared like crazy, not just a few seconds before when you're looking out that door. Anybody would be. It's terrifying.
and it will change your life.
A friend of mine put it in a funny way. He said, he was a tandem instructor, and he said, what is my job? You ask, what is my job? I'll tell you. I push people to their deaths, and then I save them.
I'll just add a little something about fear. I've done a lot of things in life, and I think people need to acknowledge their fear, embrace their fear, and then overcome their fear. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very good way of putting it.
Then this is Shelley, and she's the artist that's working on all these big murals. Tell us a little bit about your work, Shelley.
It's more like a trade. I'm from Elberton, Georgia. In our little hometown, we specialize in granite. And what I'm doing is I'm engraving the walls with a Dremel tool.
You etch in on the granite with that Dremel tool right there.
Yes,
And then now you're putting some kind of paint on?
I am.
What?
Different artists use different etchers use different paint, but right, I'm using glass paint. So, but the first thing we'll do is we'll put a layout on the stone, and then we will take carbon paper and carbon off the design, and then we'll go back in with a Dremel tool with a little diamond tip on the end and engrave the stone. So now I'm just putting a little bit of color in the stone.
Well, that's way cool. So she's putting the paint on that one. Now let me show you one that's already been done. Right over here. See that nice little scene right there? Now she's scraping the paint off. And the paint stays in the little etchings.
Yes, and it just comes right off the polish.
This is Katie McVeigh, and she's going to tell us a bit about skydiving and some interesting other things.
I had a really fun time today reconnecting with an old friend, Ann Gardner Curtis. When I started skydiving in 1969, I was the first president of the UNC Chapel Hill Sport Parachute Club, and I started skydiving at Rayford, North Carolina. But when I had about 50 jumps, my coach, Jean Paul Thacker, took me to DeLand, Florida. And the first day I was there, I met this really beautiful redhead, recently married, named Ann Gardner Curtis. It was only my second competition. I did accuracy and style. And Ann would watch me and critique me and encourage me. First woman I'd ever had do that. There weren't many women competing back then. And in my logbook I wrote, DeLand competition, did pretty well. Ann Gardner Curtis was a big help. And then about 3 months later, after jumping only 6 months, I was my first national skydiving competition in Plattsburgh, New York. And all through my logbook is Ann Gardner Curtis is here, and she's such a big help. And so that was fun because Ann was an early mentor for me. Then I find later, I've looked for her since I started skydiving again. So basically, I just competed in skydiving from 1969. I started 1970 to 72. I was injured at the 1972 Nationals. I'd been nationally ranked. I was an alternate with the U.S. team. 72, I really hurt myself, and I had to make a decision whether to keep trying to jump or quit and have a family, which I did. But last year, the spring of 2022, I started skydiving again. I said, my husband passed away, matter of fact, 3 years ago today, and I thought, there's an itch I got to scratch because I never, ever went outside on a blue sunny day and didn't think about jumping out of an airplane. And so I started skydiving again last spring and started trying to reconnect with people I knew back then. There aren't many of them left alive, but I tracked down one or two. But I looked for Ann. She's not on social media. I found a few newspaper articles, but it was so much fun today to reconnect with her and go, do you know how important you were to me when I was 21 and you were 26 or 28, and you reached down and helped me? And she always loved helping women. But anyway, so also I've come back to skydiving, and there's something called the Skydiver Resurrection Award. How long you've stopped skydiving and come back. And I'm the highest SRA, Skydiver Resurrection Number, in the world. It's been 50 years, and that's a high number. Thrilled to be back in the sport. I love the people, I love skydiving, and I'm very grateful to be back here.
I'm here with Selena Jones, and she's the wife of Marty, and she's going to tell us a little bit about some parachuting.
I started skydiving in 2001, not terribly long ago, at my father-in-law's drop zone in Anchorage, actually Wasilla, Alaska. Since then, I've got my D license. I have close to 7,000 skydives. I'm currently the Ambassador Cargo Project Manager for Complete Parachute Solutions. What does that mean? I get to throw guided cargo systems out of the back of an airplane from 225 pounds to 10,000 pounds, all on ram air canopies, and I'll put them within 100 meters of wherever you want them. I'm a master rigger, a retired AFF instructor, and coach.
What is rigging exactly?
There are different types of riggers in the world. My specialty is parachute rigging. And being a master rigger, that means that I can pack the reserve canopy for personnel use for emergency situations when they have to cut their main away and use their life-saving device. Once upon a time I worked in skydiving. I did AFF in video. I would do anywhere from 15, 16 jumps a day. I'm a little retired from that pace now. I jump primarily for fun.
This is Diana on the left and Sila, and they just did their first tandem parachute jump. How did that feel?
It was amazing. I never thought that I'd be jumping out of a plane. I'm terrified of heights, but it's completely different. Your ears hurt, they pop and pop, but it's completely worth it. You guys have to do it.
Try it out.
Yes.
It is exhilarating. It's a lot of fun. Everybody amped us up. And our instructor, Kyle, was awesome. He
Amazing.
totally kept me cool and safe. He had all the attachments. Like, he checked them like more times than I wanted to. And I was like, that is a really safety thing. So
Yes.
I was super safe. I felt really good, and I had a great job.
The free fall is super intense. You can't hear anything. You're just falling, falling, falling. And then when he's doing the hand signals and he's about to open the parachute, you kind of feel a pull. But after that, you just glide.
That's the funnest part.
So we'll definitely do it again. Not anytime soon. I need to get over this headache first, and then I'll do it again.
So you thought it was just an absolute rush, right?
Yes. Like this overwhelming feeling of like adrenaline, or I don't even know what it is. It just makes
But then
you
the
feel so
parachute
good.
opens. Like for me, when the parachute opened, then it was like just gliding.
Calmness.
And calmness. Everything's quiet. You can't hear anything. You get lost in what you're looking at, which is Mother Nature. You get to see her in a completely different view. And
It even gets like a little emotional because it's so quiet and peaceful up there. So that's awesome. Some type of a meditation. Extreme. meditation.
Were you guys nervous at first, though? Were you scared at all?
Yes. Are you kidding me? I've been nervous for like since we talked about
I
it.
wasn't. I was more nervous last night. I couldn't sleep. I kept
Right.
thinking, am I really going to do this?
What if something
Like,
happens?
what the hell?
Something bad.
And then I was the first one up. And I was like, sure, let's do it. And I just kept following whatever he told me, and everything worked out perfectly. So when the plane was going up, it almost felt like you were in a boat. Like nothing was really moving. So you're kind of like just slowly seeing that the floor and everything is getting farther and farther away. And then when you least expect it, it's
They open the
cold,
door.
it's louder, they open the door,
Yeah.
and you're just kind of
Like,
hanging
oh, this
there
is
after
really
everybody
happening.
else jumps. Yeah, and then you're like, okay, whoop, and that's it. Center of the world, at Felicity.
California.
This is Kathleen, and she just did her first tandem jump. Tell me about that.
This was the most incredible experience of my life. Now I'm going to tell you, a few minutes ago I would have told you that having babies was the most incredible experience in my life, but by comparison that pales. This was so much fun, a lot of less pain, and just absolutely overwhelming emotionally. I actually cried at the end because I was so happy to have done it.
This is Bob Lewis, and he's written a couple books on the ladies of skydiving. Tell us about that and how you got interested in writing about these ladies.
I've been skydiving for about 25 years, and I've met a lot of the young women in skydiving, and I started collecting their stories. And at one time, a lot of it's the women that I knew now that are champions and that type of thing. But as I started digging through these things, I started finding stories about ladies from the 1800s, 1900s, that were jumping out of hot air balloons and smoke balloons and carnivals. And then I heard about the women from the war that would jump into Europe as fighter or as code operators and clandestine operators, blowing up railroad tracks and sending messages back, sometimes sneaking in up silent killing methods and things. And, you know, that fascinated me, but I didn't know what to do with those stories. But I kept accumulating them, and then after a while I was like, I've got enough for a book on the early years of skydiving. So I decided, well, if I want to do the early years, I might as well do a book series. So here we are. It's the Ladies of Skydiving book series. The first book covers the era from starting in 1799, when a lady by the name of Garnerin jumped from her husband's hot air balloon in 1799. He was one of the first to jump, and he started jumping just 2 years earlier, and she was in the crowd when she saw him jump. And she became a student, they married, and then 2 years later in 1799 she jumped. And there were some competitors, and then her niece took up the sport until 1836. It became a carnival show in Paris and throughout Europe as they traveled. The Blanchard family was another one, and so that was it. But by 1836 it kind of petered out, and there wasn't a whole lot going on. And then the United States, not a whole lot, but around when the Civil War ended, they started jumping with show balloons at carnivals and things like that in the United States, and also throughout Europe. Then you had the showmen, the Buffalo Bill Cody's, and those kind of folks who would employ balloons.
In 2013, I was inducted into the Skydiving Hall of Fame, and one of my team members from 1962 was also inducted the year before, and we're both here today.
Now, where exactly is the Skydiving Hall of Fame, in case anybody wants to go check it out?
Right now, they haven't built it. They're working on building it. We have the property, and I think that they will be building. I think they're supposed to break ground this year sometime, 23. And it's going to be just south of Disney on an east-west road. And it's actually in Kissimmee, but it's right on the Kissimmee-Orlando line. They put International Skydiving Museum /Hall of Fame .com, I think it is. You can read all about what's happening and what they're inducting this year and when they are and where they are if you ever want to go and see some of that stuff.
I want to thank all of you for your generosity. Thank you.
Afterwards, we all enjoyed a catered dinner and each other's company. After meeting so many parachutists, the one thing that stood out for me is the sense of camaraderie here. It's like one great big skydiving family. And then there was the cake.
Afterwards, we have our Jägermeister and Baron Jaeger. Cheers!
Jubilee! Do svidaniya.
Prost.
Another interesting attraction is the Maze of Honor here. If you want to meet these people, you may find them on solid ground, but you're just as likely to see them dropping from the clouds. The next time you look to the sky, think about these daring men and women who blazed the path so that we could all safely experience the thrill of the free fall.
I hope you enjoyed coming to the center of the world with me and meeting the pioneers of parachuting. Don't forget to give me a like on the video, share, and subscribe. Until next time, this is Rockhopper. I'll see ya.